the Ron and Fez Show. Standing by, Tim Callahan and his book, Secret Origins of the Bible. That's available on Amazon.com.
And in stores all over. One of the things that we're going to try to find out tonight with Mr. Callahan, the Bible, is it historical fact, Fez, or a bunch of nice stories for people to read and learn from? The way you feel still, even because you're the way you were raised, historical fact.
Historical fact. The Bible is true.
Okay. I'm not saying that it's not true, because mythology can be true. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't mean that there's not truth to mythology, but you wouldn't always go out of your way to call those stories fact.
Yeah, I think the stories that happen in the Bible actually happen. They're not just stories being told and passed down.
And could anything shake you of that, or are you open to even hearing any other theories? Or for your faith to work, you have to absolutely believe that that book is true?
I'm always open to listen to anything because my faith is strong enough to do that.
Here's Tim. Tim Callahan, you're on Ron and Fez.
Hello.
How are you, Tim?
Fine.
One of the things we wanted to talk to you about, of course, would the Bible be considered a historical book, or is it kind of mythology?
Well, first of all, you have to consider that the Bible isn't just a book, it's a library.
Mm-hmm.
You have a whole lot of different writers, and it goes, over a stretch of hundreds of years in its writing. So there is mythology in it. There is history. There's history that is somewhat novelized. There's polemics and all kinds of things in it. If you talk about the creation story, for example, that's, I would say, is mythology. And you find parallels of the creation story, the whole idea of the tree with the serpent in it. The images keeps popping up in Sumerian myth, and it's in Greeks and in the myth of the Greeks and so on.
So as these stories came together, the Christian story, it kind of co-opted other stories?
Well, I would say if it comes to the Garden of Eden, of course, that's the Jewish story, but Christianity combined not only the Jewish messianic myth, but also I'm sure there was a real Jesus, a person around who there was a core of factual material, and then there was the messianic myth of the Jews, and then there was the whole dying and rising God myth of the various mystery religions that is obviously mingled in with the story of Jesus.
So you have the story of Jesus. This was the story of a man. And as the story was spreading around, it kind of picked up other religions and was brought into the Jesus story.
Yes. For example, in the Gospel of John, you have the wedding feast at Cana, where Jesus turns water into wine. And that actually is a specialty of Dionysus, and the story was told of Dionysus turning water into wine earlier than the time of Jesus. And there was a temple, in fact, in Greece, in the region of Elis, which is the northwestern corner of the Peloponnese, where there was a temple of the priests did this great ceremony where they very ostentatiously filled these great jugs with water and put them into the temple at night and locked it. And, of course, lo and behold, the next morning they took them out, they were wine, So,
is there other stories like that are attributed to, what we consider Christian stories?
What exactly do you mean?
Well, I mean, is there stories, let's say the virgin birth, for instance?
Well, the virgin birth is a very common story, the idea that goes back to Egypt. In fact, the Lucan version of the virgin birth parallels a lot of Egyptian texts. And it's interesting with the virgin birth, the Gospel of Mark doesn't have any nativity story. And the Gospel of John just says God became flesh, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And then we have two different stories, two different creation stories, one in Luke and one in Matthew that don't jibe with each other.
Have you ever found in your studies stories that appear like in the Bible and also appear in civilizations that weren't around, like let's say the Holy Land area, like maybe something from Asia that matches up with the Middle East?
Mostly it's the Middle Eastern thing. There's one myth I would say that's universal. There's a few things that are universal. One is the whole myth that comes down to us in the Judeo-Christian tradition as the fall. It's sort of a change in other stories. It's when you go from being a child to an adult, you lose the connection you have with the world. You become self-conscious, become separate, and you suddenly realize you're finite and you're going to die. And then the other myth would be there was a common idea of partaking of the god's flesh that we find Aztec and Inca ceremonies. As a matter of fact, when Spanish priests came into Peru in the 1500s, they were quite shocked to find that the Peruvian Indians had a ceremony where they drank maize wine, and they ate special cakes baked by the daughters of the sun. It was a holy meal, and it was they were so shocked by it, they called it a blasphemous satanic parody of the Eucharist.
Because it wasn't exactly the same, or wasn't done by.
Well, it was too
priests.
close.
Yeah. Too
close for comfort.
Right.
So it was obviously a very thing, and that idea of eating the god is there. Also, the Aztecs had a ceremony called eating the god. There was a god named Huitzilopochtli, if I'm getting it right. And they would make an image of the god out of poppy seed, and then would eat that, and they would call it a ceremony called eating the god.
That would be a great name for a band, by the way. All right, why do you think Christianity, was it done on purpose to bring all these stories together? Like, especially since the church settled in Italy, wouldn't it, and they must have some customs or whatever that they like. Do you think it was done that way, or almost an assimilation of everything?
I think it was an assimilation. You have Christianity starting out as a somewhat dissident Jewish sect, and then don't remember the exact year. The Council of Jaffna is toward the end of the first century. The Jews declared that the Christians were no longer co-religionists. They'd gone too far out. And as the religion expanded, it kind of absorbed things from what's called, I can't think of the word right now, but they absorbed the motifs of other religions. And it was it's called religious syncretism. And it's basically what happened was that they had a number of competitors, and they simply outdid their competitors. They had the Mithraite cult, and they had the cult of Isis, and they took from the cult of Isis the imagery of the Virgin and Child, the mother and child imagery. You look at the statues of Isis and the infant Horus and reliefs and such, and I have some illustrations in my book that's quite obvious that that image was taken from them. And then they did do some deliberate co-opting later on. For example, when they became the more dominant religion, they took over, and this is a common thing that religions do to take the place of the other religion, is they take over their holidays.
Right.
So they said, no, this is no longer the winter solstice, which in the Julian calendar at that time was December 25th. They said this is no longer the birthday of Mithra and his guys as Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. This is now the birthday of Jesus. And so we blot out your holiday and we replace it with ours.
But you still get the day off. You still get your feast day.
It's a nice thing.
And the same thing with Easter. You still get to do, there will be some sexual things with eggs and rabbits. But in the meantime, it's also the day that... What about the fact of rising from the dead? Has that ever happened in any other religions?
Well, yes, there is the death and resurrection thing. Dionysus did it. Attis did it in the cult of Attis and Cybele. And it's a fairly common thing, the idea of personally triumphing over death, and the idea of if this God can triumph over death, can rise, it's the dying and rising God, then you can do so also.
Tim, the other thing I was curious about is, at what time did we say, okay, it's the Bible that is the true word, and if you don't obey the Bible and the people that are pushing the Bible, you're on the outside of God? Because obviously that wasn't Jesus' message, but somewhere along the line that message got picked up.
Once Christianity became, it sort of became de facto the state religion of the Roman Empire under Constantine, but then later under Theodosius was officially the state religion, and they actually closed in both those periods, they closed the pagan temples and forbade the worship and so on, and then they began to regularize the Bible. And so it was not only that you had to believe in the Bible, but you had to believe in the specific Bible.
Right.
That was saying. So certain books were outlawed or not outlawed, but they were taken out of the canon, and sometimes they were considered heretical, sometimes they just were considered...
because they no longer felt that they fit in with whatever
right.
group was running things at the time.
For example, there's the book of Enoch, the first, is called First Enoch, because there are other books of Enoch written later on, but this was written about the same time as the book of Daniel, that is about 150 years before the time of Jesus. And then the Bible, as it existed in early Christianity, contained the book of Enoch. We know this from a number of clues. One is that the missionaries who took a Bible down to Ethiopia in around the year 330 took a Bible that had the book of Enoch in it. It's still in the Ethiopian canon. And it was taken out of the canon in the official church because of a certain doctrine that came about. There was sort of an unfortunate thing in Genesis where it says that the sons of God came down and had carnal relations with the daughters of men and produced a race of giants. And this is kind of disturbing since it sounds a lot like the old pagan mythology. So they came up with what's called the Sethite doctrine, that the sons of God meant the descendants of Seth that were godly, and the daughters of men were the daughters of Cain, who were these worldly, wicked women, seduced these nice Sethite boys. And that was a way of getting away from angels having sex with mortal women. And so since Enoch still had that was a featured part of Enoch, was the watcher angels disobeyed God, going down and having sex with women. That meant that Enoch had to be taken out of the Bible.
We're talking with Tim Callahan. His book is Secret Origins of the Bible. Tim, let me ask you this. What in the Bible have you found that is backed up by historical fact? What are some of the things that are historically true?
Well, there's quite a bit of stuff. The kings, for example, in the Bible that are mentioned. We have specifically corroborating evidence from preserved Assyrian records. The Assyrians were nice enough to inscribe things on stone or write on wet clay and then bake it. So we actually have the original documents.
Old Testament kings like David and Nebuchadnezzar?
The kings that come up in the Assyrian records, the Assyrians weren't interested in Israel until they got around to coming near to conquering. It was Omri, the father of Ahab himself, Hezekiah, and before Hezekiah, a king known as Ahaz, whose name was probably Jehoahaz, who's mentioned by Tiglath-Pileser III. And so you can infer the others. As far as, it's still a controversy as far as David and Solomon go as to whether there ever was a united Israel. I believe there was briefly a united Israel. They might have had a little pocket empire there that lasted not quite 2 generations, and during a time when there was a power vacuum between when Egypt wasn't powerful and Assyria hadn't risen back up to power yet.
Okay, well, thank you, Tim. Tim Callahan, his book is Secret Origins of the Bible. You can get that at Amazon.com or in any bookstore.
Thank you very much, Tim.
You're welcome.
I'm sorry, I passed out somewhere along the way. Wonder Boy, having a booking is not the same as, a good interview. I know you feel happy that you were able to book the guy, but you got to pre-interview him.
Yeah, he wasn't so wordy before. That I should have talked to him more.
Well, did you ask him anything, or did you just talk to him about you and what's going on between you and your girlfriend?
And what's happening with White Riot?
No,
I do like the central part of this, the fact that these stories ended up different places than with Christ, before Christ. How could that happen, Fez?
My thought would be that it's a universal message that's making its way into every civilization.
So then why be a Christian? Why be a Christian if the universal message is already out there? And more than just why be a Christian? Why be the type of Christian that has to follow this book? Sometimes I think that's the thing that's the big turnoff for religion for a lot of us. Somebody walking around with a book saying this is the Word of God is a huge turnoff. And a lot of the stuff that fits in there are the same people who go, how insane that these Muslims are willing to kill themselves by what's in this Quran. We've got another bunch of people on the other side with a Bible, a lot of other nutty stories that do not belong here for the modern man. They literally, it makes you think, as a modern person, why would you sit and believe this whole thing? And the President of the United States is willing to sit there calmly and go, hey, no matter what happens, I know I have this book. The whole thing could blow up. What do I care? I have this book.
I think in this country, for the most part, people only get exposed to that book. So if they're going to, base their faith and everything on that book.
No, I'm not talking about basing faith. I'm talking about the way you're treating other people. I'm talking about the way that you think laws should go down and other people should be attacked for being gay or being pro-choice, whatever it happens to have. And then you're showing up waving a book in the air, basically to me looking like you're in the Taliban by the time you're at that point. All right, we're going to open up the phone lines now. 866-277-4969. 866-277-4969. Hey, Josh, you're on the Ron and Fez show.
Hey, guys. Great speaker you just had on.
Yeah, I know. It was death.
To your question you asked before you went on break earlier, do you believe in the Bible or do you think it's stories? I believe in it. And I did grow up in a Christian family, but they always suggested that if I have questions that I should always research it. They didn't do it for me. My parents, they always had me do it. And what cemented my faith, I would say, would be the prophecies that turned out to be true, and also, little scientific things. The Bible's not a scientific book, but there's a few things that, like the shape of the planet Earth, things like that are talked about in Isaiah before, anyone...
I know that you want to make that leap of faith of saying that it was talked about by Isaiah because there's little things, but it's not laid out there like anything more than generalization. You know what I'm saying, Josh? And then people can read into it. And one of the things that always weirds me out about this is that Manson is one of the people that could read into it. Or any kind of nutcase out there can read into this because there's really non-specific descriptions that show up in the Bible.
Well, it says that God sits above the circle of the earth. I don't know. I didn't think that's reading too much into it.
Well, a circle is not a sphere. They thought that the world was flat then. But if it would have said Jesus sat down and said, listen, a long time ago there was dinosaurs, here's how many planets we have. By the way, there's Indians living on the other side of the ocean. That would be phenomenal to me. I would drop that book. I would scream, how would this guy know this? But these generalizations that normally come with later generations trying to prove their point to that is what really weirds me out. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. We'll take your phone calls. 866-277-4969. 866-277-4969. It's the Ron and Fez.